Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. This week, our guests are author and authority on intelligence issues in the Middle East and everything else foreign affairs, the Washington Post, David Ignatius, and an expert on Georgia politics, journalist Stephen Fowler. Remember, we love taking your questions, so write into politicswarroom@gmail.com or send a tweet to @Politicon for next week's show. We'll get to as many as we can, and don't forget to tell us where you're from. Please check out the links to our sponsors, Lomi, Blinkist, and Raycon in the show notes. We thank you for supporting our sponsors. It really helps make this podcast happen. Please tell your friends about us and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. Hey, James, I must tell you, I fear the tide is shifting a little to the Republicans. And I thought maybe the New York Times poll that showed a Republican advantage that was clearly up was a little bit of an outlier. But I see things like Gretchen Whitmer, who was up double digits now, ahead by only 4 or 5 in Michigan. Even the New York gubernatorial race is tightening. There are mixed results, but more of them are moving slightly to the GOP advantage than the Democrats.
I agree. And you know, the North Carolina poll, it was disturbing. The Times was disturbing. I thought, as did a lot of people, thought it was an outlier. I'll be nervous and talking to people and see if this is real, but it's troubling for right now.
It's small, but it's clear. I think
small and clear is what we don't need.
What you don't need, because as you've said, and as Charlie Cook and others have said, things don't break 50-50 at the end. They tend to break one way. And as of today, 19 days out, they're breaking more for them. I think one of the reasons is, I don't totally understand this, but they appear to have a huge money advantage. I mean, McConnell is pouring money into Ohio, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, well outspending Democrats. I went into this thinking spending would be an even field. It wouldn't make that big a difference. I think maybe it is.
Well, you know, I don't know if New York State is tightening, but there's no Senate candidate, and
That's
Michigan
true.
is tightening.
Yeah.
You know, I would reserve, I'd reserve the right, you know, to be more definitive later, but it's hard to say that some of this stuff coming over the transom is not troubling. I think it is.
Yeah. Okay, we'll be back next week on this chit-chat with hopefully a more upbeat note. With the challenges of climate change growing by the year, nothing is more important than doing everything you can to make a difference. And one of the best things you can do on the personal level is reducing and reusing our food waste. No matter how hard we try, we all create a lot. And composting in our homes is a great way to take action. Plus, Lomi is the perfect supplement to kicking off or sustaining a home garden. Like us, you might not have known where to start, but luckily we found Lomi by Pila. It's an amazing machine that allows us to turn our food scraps into dirt with a push of a button. To fill you in, Lomi is a countertop electric composter that turns scraps to dirt in under 4 hours. There's no smell when it runs, and it's really quiet. Not only do you reduce your trips to the garbage can and slow the expansion of our landfills, it also helps cut down on the methane released into the environment. Just last week, we had a giant family brunch, and instead of packing it into garbage bags, Lomi turned the remnants into nutrition-rich dirt that went straight to our yard plants. Cleanup gets easier, our carbon footprints get smaller, and we feel great knowing we're creating soil instead of waste, especially with the urgency of climate change on the Gulf Coast. How great is Lomi as an avenue for taking action, James?
I think this is an unbelievable product. And most smart people think that the only way we can deal with this climate thing is through technology, and like a terrific product that is really, really useful. And, you know, we all have food waste is terrible, and you feel bad about it, but you can feel a little bit better about it knowing that you're not dumping it and you're growing other food with it.
Now, if you want to start making a positive environmental impact or just make cleanup after dinner that much easier, Lomi is perfect for you. Head to lomi.com/warroom and use the promo code WARROOM to get $50 off your Lomi. That's $50 off when you head to lomi.com/warroom and use promo code WARROOM at checkout. Food waste is gross. Lomi is your solution. You want to move quickly as they're over 80% sold out for October. You also can find the links in our show notes. There is no better foreign affairs reporter than Washington Post columnist David Ignatius. In his spare time, he's written 11 novels. He and I were colleagues at the Wall Street Journal nearly 40 years ago. He's come a bit further than me. David, you wrote an intriguing column a week ago that the widespread protest in Iran over the morality police killing a young woman for not wearing the hijab were far more serious than previous protests. They've continued. What's your take today?
So I think, Al, that this is the closest we've seen to a real nationwide uprising in Iran, certainly since the 2009 protests that we call the Green Revolution. The reason that I think, and I'm here quoting Iranian analysts I trust, think that this is so different, is first, it's widespread among Iranian women who were fearless, who were in the streets every day, who brave police, who brave the threat of arrest and beating. And the protests are spreading to other parts of Iranian society. You see beginnings of labor strikes, movement among people in the bazaar, the bazaar merchants who were the people who really brought down the Shah in 1979. You begin to see signs of that. And the final thing I'd say, Al, is that the regime itself seems to be understanding that it's going to have to make concessions. There have been statements in the last several days from IRGC leaders suggesting that there needs to be some compromise on the role of the so-called morality police who arrested the young Kurdish Iranian woman last month and apparently beat her to death. So those are all signs, I think, that this is different. Whether it will go all the way and change the Iranian government, nobody can predict, but this is big.
Well, it's really interesting to hear you see signs that they're looking for some kind of a solution, because it looks from afar like they're doubling down. They brutally killed hundreds, if not thousands, of protesters, arrested many more. It's unclear how they're treating Elnaz Rikabi, who wasn't wearing a headscarf in an international rock climbing tournament. Something happened with her. But you think that they might be looking for a way out of this?
So I don't want to overstate the degree of compromise. Iran's a complicated country. The IRGC has different tendencies. What they want, above all, is to hold on to their power. The IRGC runs parts of the economy, obviously has a total control in the security area. And what I've read in a recent statement by a senior figure of the IRGC Navy, for example, is a question about the extreme theocratic practices, the role of the so-called morality police and going around the streets. The IRGC does not want this crisis to get to the point that its own authority is challenged. And so in no way should you think that this is the hardliners giving up power. It may be modest concessions so as to reinforce their power.
And David, what more can the United States and others do to support these women? So
I think, Al, the most important thing that we can do is to try to keep communications open for Iran to the world. The regime counts on being able to suppress public discussion, sharing of information. It was telling that one of the first things they did as these protests began to spread was to turn off the internet. That has not been entirely successful. As you and your listeners know, Elon Musk has offered to provide Starlink service, his satellite-based internet broadband connection for the Iranian people. The question is how to get the dishes that would receive those signals into Iran, how to set up the infrastructure for communications. There's a lot of discussion, I think, within various agencies of the U.S. government about how to do that, about whether it's worth the risk. But there are other ways to get broadband signals. You could sail a ship that has repeaters up to the Iranian coast and get signals in. You can get signals across the border other ways. But I think that trying to keep communications open should be job one for the U.S.
So, David, you can't confuse the government with the country sometimes. And I have this theory that underneath it, they're really crappy government, that Iran is a real country. I mean, half of the people in Iran have a college education, over half of them are women. I mean, it's an ancient civilization. They can do things. Is there any... Assume that you know it's a hard, tough, and you don't know if you replace this government that you're going to get much better. But wouldn't it be great if we had a decent government in Iran and could be allies with them as opposed to Saudi Arabia, which I don't think can do half the crap that Iran can do as a country.
So, James, as you say, Iran is a real country. It's a real civilization. I visited there twice in the last dozen years, and each time I've been struck by how sophisticated people are. You go to parties in North Tehran, and behind closed doors, you have the most sophisticated conversations about cinema, art. You also have a good bottle of wine and shot of something harder. The idea that this is, theocracy where people are all rigidly, that doesn't happen that way. But if Iran could escape this backward-looking theocracy and become the modern country that Iranians passionately want it to be, it would be, I think, the most fundamental game changer for that part of the world, and arguably for the world as a whole. If Iran, the most strident anti-American country in the world, should change course, that's as important as the 1979 revolution was in the opposite direction. This is a country, James, that lives on the slogan, "Death to America," and it's not working for them anymore, at least not in the way that it used to. When you have a young woman, placing at the top of an international rock climbing competition with no hijab, and she comes home and she's mobbed by Iranians who are so proud of her, who want to celebrate her. The police are out trying to stop people, and they can't stop them because they're proud of this young woman. That's something new, and I think it's going to be hard for the authorities to.
Yeah, I wish, if they had any kind of different government, they would do like what Israel does and bring influential Americans to Iran, because people that, like you, that I've talked to, and they said, you can't believe the architecture, you can't believe the art, you can't believe with just a great potential that this country has. And, of course, it has not much potential with these theocrat criminals that run it now. But, man, we can hope, and your reporting, it gives us embers of hope.
It's a fabulous country. I wrote after I went there that it was somewhere between Pyongyang and Los Angeles. But the Los Angeles part is pretty, it's wow. It is as modern as any place you know.
I know that you will. I know you continue reporting on this, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the situation in Ukraine. And how surprised are you that we are where we are today compared to what you thought in February?
So I was just in Kyiv 10 days ago. I was there the day that they attacked the Kerch Strait Bridge, and was fortunate to get out of the country 24 hours before the massive bombing wave that we've seen since then. And I was struck face to face by the same things that we all see in the newspapers. First, the Iranian military, the Ukrainian military has performed with just extraordinary skill in pushing back this enormous Russian land army. It's military historians, students at West Point for 50 years will be studying how the Ukrainians did this, how they used deception, operational planning to make these incredible advances. The second thing that you see in every conversation with Ukrainians is their defiance, their courage, obviously. I mean, these people are just, they're so brave. You know, I saw a huge wall painting in the middle of Kyiv that said, "Be brave like Ukraine." And that's what everybody wants to be. Be brave like Ukraine. So they're defiant. They don't want to compromise. They want us to stand with them and give them weapons. And, you know, they think they're going to win every day. And I get messages, Al and Jim, on my phone every day from the friends I made there, you know, just showing me, here's what it's like in the shelters. Here's my little son, you know, with his teddy bear. Here's what it looked like as a plane exploded outside my window and fell to the ground. You know, it's just they're living a nightmare, but they're defiant.
Hey, guys, excuse me, David, I can't thank you enough. I hope we'll be back. Al, if you can just bring the interview home. I got to run to this next meeting. Yes,
I got a bunch more, James. I hope I'll make you proud with these questions.
David, thank you so much. And I mean, the stuff on Iran, we could just dream one day that could be an ally, which would be worth all the rest of them put together, I think. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
David, I will say on Ukraine, we had dinner in late January, and you had just gotten back from Ukraine, and you were prescient on exactly what how tough they would be, how prepared they were, and how much rougher it was going to be for the Russians. That sure has happened, and they're winning in the battlefield. Yet the Russians are bombarding civilians and energy infrastructure. With winter approaching right now, just look ahead.
So it's going to be a terrible winter for the Ukrainians. The Russian attacks are not having much effect on the battlefield. And the battlefield situation remains as negative for Russia as it was a month ago. In fact, probably even more so. In the south, in the Kherson area that is key strategically as a gateway to the Black Sea, the Russians are in worse trouble this week than ever. So I think we have to distinguish between attempts to break the will of civilians and the actual military course of the battle. My fear, I'll just be frank about this, when President Putin, in announcing his mobilization of Russian forces, referenced the American use of nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and said, "I'm not bluffing." What I think he was saying was America used its nuclear weapons to shorten a war that it was determined to win. That's why we used those weapons. We didn't want to invade with a huge army, the home islands. So we used nuclear weapons. They had a military purpose. Putin knows his army is exhausted. He does not want to have to invade Ukraine all the way to Kyiv again. And I think it's possible that he will adopt this nuclear strategy just as the United States did. We need to take it seriously and find a way to deter him. And that's, I think, the Pentagon is working 24/7 to think about this problem.
Well, David, as horrific as that would be, he may not have any other off-ramp.
So that's the problem. This is a man who cannot lose, who's losing. So what's the proper United States response for that? President Biden, I think correctly, continues to say he wants to see a negotiated settlement for this. This is not a war that's going to end in unconditional surrender by either side. So how do you negotiate a settlement? But So far, I see no evidence whatsoever of the back channel to Putin that might begin a process of discussion to keep this. We're about to jump the next ladder of escalation here. Not necessarily nuclear, but possibly. And it's a scary time. And I think we're lucky to have people with good judgment in the White House.
Well, Dave, let me pick up that. I find out what I think about foreign policy from reading you. It seems to me that the Biden administration was justifiably criticized for the way we got out of Afghanistan. It was really messy. I would argue we should have gotten out, but they did it in exactly the wrong way. My impression is they have handled this situation almost perfectly, and yet they seem to get very little credit for it.
They get credit in Europe. I just have been, in addition to being in Kyiv and Warsaw and other places in Europe, in Italy, and they get high marks for organizing the NATO alliance, for sharing intelligence with our allies that made clear the seriousness of these problems. I've never seen NATO alliance management handled better than by this group. You can argue that they were late in providing the weapons that Ukraine needs to hold its ground. I think they made a mistaken estimate, as the world did, that the Ukrainians couldn't hold out against this enormous Russian army. They thought the war would be over in a couple weeks. So they didn't initially bring in the HIMARS because I thought, why let the Russians capture HIMARS, because they're gonna roll. So that was a mistake, but they've reversed it now. And I just read, as you probably did, in the papers this morning, that the company in the U.S. that makes the HIMARS is announcing that it's sort of World War II scale production push to build as many of these and get them in a state to export to Ukraine as possible. So I think that's good. That mobilization is essential. The core issue, Al, is the one that we were talking about earlier. If President Biden means what he says, that a negotiated settlement is essential, that you cannot take this all the way to the brink, they've got to find, as President Kennedy did in the Cuban Missile Crisis, a way to, probably in secret, negotiate the shape of a deal that will bring this war to an acceptable end. How they do that, as much as I follow foreign policy, I have to be honest, I don't know.
And they have to do it in a way that Zelensky will accept it, which makes it really difficult.
You cannot shove a settlement down the throats of people who have suffered the way that the Ukrainians have. They're not going to take it. Right. So it's going to be, watch this space. We'll see either one of the most, the most effective diplomatic rounds since JFK and the Cuban Missile Crisis, or we may see a disaster.
Well, we will watch David Ignatius' space always, because you are the premier foreign affairs reporter, and we appreciate you being on this show, and we'll stay in touch, David.
Thank you, Al. It's great to be with you and Jim.
Give your wife a hug.
Okay. Same to Judy. Bye.
With the end of the year approaching, now is a time to make some knowledge gains to take 2023 to the next level. Nothing is better for that than Blinkist. Blinkist helps you discover and understand key insights and powerful ideas from books and podcasts in record time with blinks and shortcasts. Imagine discovering new perspectives, having exciting conversations, and finding those aha moments you've been looking for. Blinkist offers the best selection of nonfiction books and podcasts condensed down to 15 minutes for immediate inspiration and mastery. They offer over 5,500 titles in 27 categories in their unique, entertaining, and engaging audio format. It's perfect no matter where you are and what you're doing, and whether it's for education and pleasure. Not only is Blinkist easy and enjoyable to use, you can even listen and read at the same time by downloading titles for offline access. And while celebrating their 10-year anniversary, Blinkist launched a totally new function that will be your favorite feature ever. Think of all those great ideas you naturally want to share and discuss with others instead of just keeping them to yourself. Blinkist Connect does just that. Blinkist Connect allows all premium users to share your account with another person of your choice. So you effectively get 2 premium accounts for the price of 1 at zero cost. That way you can easily share Blinks and Shortcasts with each other with just 1. James and I are going to get into sharing with the best because I know James, who has always said that this is such a great product. We've got to get the people on who created it, the architects, and we're going to do that one of these days. And with things accelerating in Europe, we're captivated and horrified by the Doomsday Machine by Daniel Ellsberg and its discussion of nuclear policy and the threat these weapons pose. There are many other titles on Blinkist that give you unique insights on political and military policy, but you can learn more about any topic you can think of with Blinkist. So right now, Blinkist has a special offer just for our audience. Go to Blinkist.com/warroom to start your 7-day free trial and get 25% off a Blinkist premium membership. That's Blinkist, spelled Blinkist, Blinkist.com/warroom to get 25% off and a 7-day free trial. Again, Blinkist.com/warroom. And now for a limited time, you can even use Blinkist Connect to share your premium account so you get 2 premium subscriptions for the price of 1. You can also look for the link in our show notes. Hey, James, a foremost journalistic expert on politics in Georgia, where there are a lot of high-stakes politics this year, is Steve Fowler of Georgia Public Television. Steve, we are so pleased to have you on this program. And let me start off by saying I watched the Warnock-Walker debate almost a week ago. And while Warnock didn't hit it out of the park, I thought Herschel Walker was embarrassingly bad, confused by some questions on capping insulin costs, said you got to eat, the phony stunt of pulling out a sheriff's badge. Yet much of the post-debate analysis was expectations were so low, Walker helped himself.
Well,
tell me what...
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think Herschel Walker went into this debate saying, I'm not smart and I'm going to lose this debate. And so when you set the expectations so low like that, it's very easy, particularly for a national media environment that thrives off of this kind of minute-by-minute horse race update. Yeah, the ball was knocked out of the park. I mean, from my perspective and for a lot of perspective of people in Georgia, there wasn't really anything new learned from either candidate in this race other than the Herschel Walker sheriff badge debacle. I mean, the format of the debate wasn't really conducive to debating. Herschel Walker got as many questions about his controversial alleged abortion that he paid for as whether or not he would change the name of the Atlanta Braves. And so really, you know, Herschel Walker needed this debate more than Raphael Warnock. And I think the way both candidates approached that, they served their goals.
Yeah. My impression from afar, and that Washington's not the best place to understand the heartland, but 19 days out, is that Republican Brian Kemp is likely to win re-election and probably topping 50% on November 8th. I want to point out this 19 days out. Warnock will likely run ahead of Walker, but probably less than 50% within a runoff a month later. How reasonable does that seem as of today?
Well, see, I have a bit of a pariah take here because I think it's more likely that Raphael Warnock could win outright and Brian Kemp could be dragged down into a runoff based on some of the reputable polling that's come through here and based on kind of anecdotal on-the-ground reporting as well as the first couple days of early voting data here. Polling that is reliable shows Warnock and Brian Kemp getting similar shares of their own party and the opposite party, but independents have been breaking for Raphael Warnock even more. And if you have an electorate that shows out that is a little bit more even than some of these polls suggest, a lot of polls have a much more Republican electorate showing up, you could see a scenario where Kemp could nose down barely under 50 and Warnock could be barely over 50. But really, it's hard to tell, too, because what Democrats are doing is they're pouring a lot of time and resources into newly registered voter, low propensity voters that don't show up in these likely voter polls. And their argument is, you don't know who we're bringing out to the polls, so you're counting us out. But I do think conventional wisdom at this point would point to both Kemp and Warnock being victorious without a runoff, but Georgia does have that runoff law, and we've got a lot of libertarians trying to give people a third choice, and that choice is runoff.
Well, wow. I mean, that's really some insight. You mentioned, who's voting. Early voting began in the Peach State on Monday. A massive turnout, far bigger than the last midterm, almost as big as the presidential year. Do you get any sense as to who is voting in this early vote?
Well, it is still too early. We know more people are voting than the last midterm, and we know in the last midterm, Stacey Abrams came, about 55,000 votes short. Georgia has typically enjoyed a lot of people using the 3 weeks of early voting, and the data I've looked at so far suggests that these are a lot of the people that typically show up in person and early vote. I mean, anecdotally, in some of Atlanta's counties, you've seen a lot of older black voters show up and vote these first couple days. Looking at the math, more than half of the people that have cast a ballot so far are over the age of 65, and so that doesn't necessarily tell you as much about these breakdowns of voters, but one narrative that will go through this is that Georgia had the big voting law that changed a lot of things, and Democrats are saying, look at us, we're overcoming this voting law, and Republicans are saying, look, the voting law made it easy to vote. But I guess the bottom line takeaway is, with the ungodly amounts of money that the Senate and the governor races have poured into Georgia, a lot of people are paying attention, and really the stakes that both of these campaigns and these parties have put in Georgia, they've made this a referendum on the future direction of America more so than what's best for Georgia.
James.
So Stephen, I talked to Chris Hutman this morning, and he's taking out for voters that didn't vote in 2018, that are early voters in 2022. And they look pretty favorable for Democrats. It was like, I want to say 58, 59 white, it was 32, 33 black, which was, pretty good ratio. I mean, not early Republicans don't early vote much, but I don't know how much to extrapolate from that. But it does seem like with this going to be another heavy turnout election in Georgia. You agree with that analysis?
Absolutely. We had 4 million people show up in 2018. That was a record for a midterm. 5 million people showed up in 2020. That was a record for a presidential year. And this looks to be somewhere between the two of those. And another stat people should keep in mind is 1 million new people have been added to the rolls here since the last governor's race in 2018. Many of those people tend to be younger, more diverse, Democratic-leaning areas. And so, it's probably going to be another close election. I mean, these polls saying that, Brian Kemp's up 5 or 6 points, stuff like that, that's not real. But there's a lot of people voting, and it's a little too early to see where. But, I mean, like you mentioned, there are a lot of people voting that Democrats should feel pretty good about in these first couple of days, in these first couple 100,000 votes.
So I think the people that listen to this podcast look at Georgia and Herschel Walker, and it's kind of a WTF moment. Like, come on, this guy is paid, claims he's pro-life, he's paid for one abortion, tried to have another abortion, has 4 kids by 4 different mothers, most of whom he pays no attention to, has said, Tubervillian stupid things on the campaign trail, and at least from a distance, it seems to not have much effect. I mean, it's Georgia politics and American politics got to the point where it didn't even make a shit who you are. It just the letter you have after your name.
In this election, I think that's a fair assessment to say. I mean, today, Kevin Cramer's down here, Matt Schlapp's down here, Tom Cotton, Lindsey Graham, Tim Scott, all of these people are coming down. They're not saying, vote for Herschel Walker. He's an amazing stand-up guy and a champion for all of these other things. They're saying, vote for Herschel Walker because he could be the 51st Republican senator in the United States Senate. And so really, it's a zero-sum game, and Georgia's maybe the zero-summiest of all of the states right now, because at the end of the day, Republican Herschel Walker's most important asset is that he's a Republican. And that's also motivated Democrats, too, because for many people, the prospect of Herschel Walker being the majority-making seat is enough that people are like, yeah, Raphael Warnock, I maybe don't feel strong about him, but I definitely feel strong about not Herschel Walker.
And it seems to me everyone's talking about better highways or mass transit, and, around Atlanta or clean water, any of those local stuff people tend sometimes talk about in these Senate races. It's just most all national all the time, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Georgia's a shiny object. Georgia's got an electorate that is more representative of the country as a whole. It's got Republican state-level leadership that's championed policies that have brought in more Democratic-leaning voters and Democratic-leaning industries. And it's a major player in the Electoral College where most outcomes you can already write several elections out. And so it is, I like to say it's the black hole at the center of the political universe right now. But I think for at least the next decade, you're going to have a lot of money, time, and energy fighting over Georgia's votes. And it's not going to be solidly one party or the other at all levels for a while to come.
Well, what a great position for a journalist to be in. We're lucky to have
Do you like job security?
It's a lot better being there than being in Alabama. Albert?
I want to come back to Walker for a minute. I've read and actually been told by a couple of people that it was kind of, I don't know, common knowledge is too strong a word, but a lot of people knew the story about the alleged abortion. And there was incredibly strong evidence, a check, a note, a receipt, everything else. But he basically pulled from the Trump playbook. You just deny it and you deny it and it goes away. And that seems to be working on that issue.
Well, it's one of the things where at this point, I think there's a lot of things baked in the cake here. That news that the Daily Beast published about the, I shall say, alleged payment of an abortion isn't necessarily going to be the make or break moment for a lot of people if they're going to vote for Herschel Walker or not vote for Herschel Walker. Basically, for the last 14 months that he's run, there have been negative story after negative story, controversies about his past, overstatements of his resume, lack of a grasp of basic issues and politics and policy. But it just is kind of the yet another thing for people to be say, yes, this is why I'm not voting for Herschel Walker. I'm going to vote for the Libertarian, or I'm not going to vote, or I'm voting for Raphael Warnock. And so at this point, I don't think it matters in the traditional sense. This isn't, Christine O'Donnell, level, I am not a witch, or, any sort of other just like complete 180 moment. But what it does is it just reinforces what people already feel. And I think what you're seeing with the strategy of the campaign ignoring it and of the Democrats not really touching it is at this point, it's a race to the finish line of turning out as many of your voters as possible. And the Republican Party has signaled that Herschel Walker could have paid for 100 abortions. And at the end of the day, he's still a Republican, so they're going to vote for him.
We've never been sure if Christine O'Donnell was hurt more by the witchcraft or the fact that she led the anti-masturbation effort in Delaware. But anyway, let's move on. Stacey Abrams, you just get a sense that the magic that she captured on her first run isn't quite there this time.
Well, I mean, 2018 was definitely a better year for Democrats than they're facing right now. And Stacey Abrams has the disadvantage of Brian Kemp having a pretty strong economy that he can take credit for, which also, hurts Herschel Walker. Nationally, Democrats are getting hammered on inflation and the economy and gas prices and things. But here in Georgia, Brian Kemp's entire persona is Georgia's got a great economy. I did that. I opened us early in the pandemic. I cut gas prices. I paid teachers more. I gave you a tax rebate. And it's a pretty effective message. Even though he's passed one of the strictest abortion laws in the country, even though he signed voting restrictions, at the end of the day, the bank accounts of Georgians are looking pretty great. And it's hard to challenge that. I mean, I believe somebody on this podcast said it's the economy, stupid. And so it's...
Did they?
Yeah, it's it's hard for her, but I do think people are overlooking the sheer amount of money she has, the sheer amount of advertising she's putting forth towards people that don't normally show up to vote, and I think people will be surprised at the final margins and the types of people that have shown up, because I think there are certain amounts of people that are going to vote for Stacey Abrams even if they don't feel like she's running the best campaign. But there are still people out there that are getting excited and energized by her vision that aren't showing up at the same 5 places that national reporters look and aren't showing up in likely voter polls.
And no better organizer in American politics. One final question before going back to James. I think a really, really outrageous gerrymandering in Georgia, as in other states. There seems to be only one competitive congressional district, and that involves veteran Congressman Sanford Bishop. What's the outlook there?
Well, the question for me isn't if Sanford Bishop wins, but it's what his margins are. Sanford Bishop has always outrun the top of the ticket. He's got a lot of crossover support from white farmers. He's championed agriculture. He's championed the military. And those are 2 of the biggest industries in that Southwest Georgia district. But the Republican has a very strong campaign message of Sanford Bishop's been in office for 3 decades, and this is still one of the poorest districts in the country, and how come he hasn't fixed it? And he's going after white farmers, and he's going after lower-income black voters in a lot of the kind of urban areas in that district. But the problem is that national Republicans haven't put any sort of money behind trying to defeat Sanford Bishop. And so there's been air cover from Democratic groups and outside groups hitting the Republican, but nothing really hitting Bishop. So it's a effective message, but not gotten out to scale. And to me, Sanford Bishop, I spent a couple days in the district a couple weeks ago. Sanford Bishop is working like he is fighting for his life, and he's raised more money and he's spent more time talking to black voters in Southwest Georgia, that it could end up being a boon for the top of the ticket, having a competent challenger against Bishop instead of just another generic person that loses by 20.
Sure can't hurt. James.
Stephen, I'm going to let you go in a few minutes, but I had a thought. If Doug Jones and Roy Moore, they ran in 2017, and Doug famously, Democrats in Alabama, which is a real rarity. If they went to post in 2022, I think Roy Moore would win by 8 points.
He probably would. That's just the environment we're in. But Roy Moore actually, honestly, probably might not have even been recruited to run. There probably could have been, maybe they could have gotten Nick Saban to be on the ticket.
But I'm just saying this. The
better than Tommy Tuberville
is dug in, and the nationalization is dug into the fact that Roy Moore could probably, ban from the Gadsden Mall.
Well, look no further to Georgia's northwest corner and Marjorie Taylor Greene. By all accounts, Marjorie Taylor Greene should be shunned in the corner of the Republican caucus, but now there's reporting coming out, and she's openly saying Kevin McCarthy needs to give me power to please the base. And so you could have a Republican-controlled House next year with prominent Republican leader Marjorie Taylor Greene at the helm. And the Democrat running against her has basically set a bunch of money on fire for consultants, isn't working on getting out the vote, isn't working on building up capacity in a very, very Republican district. But there's just a lot of perverse incentives for campaigns running now. And really, at the end of the day, it's the letter after your name. But, there's still a possibility that a Roy Moore type situation and Herschel Walker's unique situation might be enough where it doesn't get you to 50% plus one anymore.
Maybe so. I hope so. But if you were before, you're typically knowledgeable and typically coherent and cogent guests. And I thank you very much, Albert.
Yeah, I do too, Steve. You've given us some real new insights on that Georgia race. 19 days to go, and boy, that's going to be election night. There's no place you're going to watch more closely than Georgia. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Lately, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and books, particularly some of the stuff about Donald Trump, which still makes me sick. It's been great. One reason it's been great to listen to, because I use my Raycon wireless earbuds to do it. Raycon's everyday earbuds look, feel, and sound better than ever, and with optimized gel tips for the perfect in-ear fit. These earbuds are so comfortable, plus they will not budge Trust me. Raycons give you 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life. Raycons are priced just right. You get quality audio at half the price of other premium audio brands. It's no wonder Raycon's everyday earbuds have over 50,000 five-star reviews. 50,000. Not only do you get noise isolation, but you can put them in awareness mode for when you're multitasking or on the move. And with 3 customizable sound profiles, improving your sound whether you want pure, balanced, or bass as the focus. You can maximize the experience of anything you listen to. I love mine when I'm on the road or have to handle a Zoom call, and I know James Carville, his daughters gave him his Raycons, loves them when he's out running. You'll love them as much as we do, so go to buyraycon.com/warroom today to get 15% off your Raycon order. That's buyraycon.com/warroom to score 15% off. Buyraycon.com/warroom, or look for the links in our show notes. Now for our listener questions. We're going to start off with Tim. Tim, I'm going to make an exception because all you wrote was that you're in the Northeast. Now, the Northeast is about 8 or 10 states, so next time tell us where in the Northeast. But he wants the DNC to support broad ads to tear apart the Republicans. I want the Democrats to make people ashamed to be a Republican. They continue to take the, quote, high road, end quote, and as such, they're going to lose slim majorities they now have. Why should I support a party when they aren't fighting, James? Tim asks.
Well, a little bit, I'm going to take a little bit of an issue here. People see, they look at the Herschel Walker thing, they look at Trump, and you look at your outrage and overcharging the government of doing whatever. I mean, there's a massive amount of information about how horrendous the Republicans are, and people are not necessarily biting. I think what the Democrats should do, they should run a 30-second ad. And it says, like, people around the world, Americans are being faced with steep costs in the rise of living. The Republican plan, and yes, it is a Republican plan. It was a plan for Reagan in the 80s, Gingrich in the 90s, Bush in the 2000s, and now Rick Scott, Ted Budd, and Ron Johnson want to cut Social Security and Medicare. It's actually a real issue distinction. Joe Biden and the Democrats want to levy a windfall profit tax on big corporations and oil companies and return that to consumers. Which plan do you prefer? Take it right to them. Take it right to them on the most fundamental thing. Yeah, you're right. The cost of living is high. That's their plan. This is our plan. You got to close with something. And, you know, pivoting and going to something else or talking about this is just not going to work. And I think they ought to take this thing head on.
I think one of the mistakes in the campaign in general, there's been too little attention paid to Democrats to the Rick Scott plan that does want to sunset Social Security and Medicare.
And what everybody's scared of, because, and by the way, this is something that's inbred in Republican philosophy. Again, Reagan tried to do it, accomplished a little bit. Obviously, Gingrich wanted to do it. The Wall Street Journal editorial page is. I can't tell you the number of times they talk about cutting entitlements every other time you turn around. And I don't know why we don't hang it around their neck. I just have no idea. But if they want to do something, say they want to cut Social Security and Medicare, we want to raise taxes on windfall profits to give, you know.
I couldn't agree more. Gordon in Norwood, Michigan, says he loves the podcast, he loves real paper, and we're about to try the Hold On products. Yay, Gordon. Gordon's a public defender, and he's seen many families devastated by alcohol and drugs, and democratic policy should be the answer. Unfortunately, I also believe there's a sense of desperation, of despair, that triggers addiction. How do we use politics to create communities of support that will help people feel that they belong? Gordon, some local communities have done that. Jim Fallows and Deb Fallows capture that in Charleston, West Virginia. But it takes a lot of work, and you're going to sometimes get some demagoguery from the other side that says you're coddling bad people. But this is a huge problem for America, made worse by some of the bandit companies like the Sacklers and Purdue Pharma and Cardinal. But I just think, local communities, Washington can help, but that really local communities have to band together.
Yeah, I don't know. I agree, and just the solution to this is more organic and less. I mean, I guess Congress could pass some things that assist people like this, but they all have the tax code favors them. This is one probably gonna have to solve on our own.
Yeah. Christopher in Norwood, New Jersey, says the Democrats have a problem winning Senate elections in red states, but have been able to win governor's mansions in those same red states. North Carolina, Montana, Kentucky, and Louisiana come to mind. How do Democrats win those gubernatorial races and then can't do well in the Senate contest, James?
Well, Republicans, Maryland, Massachusetts, Vermont, might even be Oregon this cycle.
Yep.
Statewide races are a little bit different. As I pointed out before, in the last 40 years, I think Kansas has had as many Democratic governors as Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
And they're a little harder to nationalize. In Louisiana, we had, we're going to do some once in a 50-year event. We had a particularly skilled and good gubernatorial candidate and particularly skilled and good governor against particularly horrific Republican opponents. Something tells me we're not going to get the luck of that draw in 2023, but we might. And by the way, I've been very big on this, and I continue to be big on it. Keep your eye on the Mississippi governor's race.
Next year.
I'm more bullish on Mississippi than I am Louisiana. And
That's next year, isn't it, James?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Kentucky, and I think Andy's got a good chance. That's not going to be a Democratic senator from Kentucky. Not going to be one from Louisiana.
Okay.
But we could win 2 out of 3.
Linda in Holden, Massachusetts, says John Fetterman's lead in Pennsylvania has narrowed considerably. Is there anything he can do to regain ground? Is it a matter of money or a new message? Linda, I am very skeptical of the idea that debates determine elections. I think they hardly ever do. The debate in Pennsylvania next Wednesday, October 25th, with Fetterman and Dr. Oz, I think may be an exception to that, because John Fetterman, he's been hurt by some of the attacks on crime and some of the other Republican attacks, but I think he's lost a lot of that lead because he had a stroke and people aren't sure if he, how ready he is. He did a not very satisfactory interview with NBC. Some of his campaign appearances have been much better. People are going to be watching that October 25th debate, and if he can hold his own, I think he can still win that. People in Pennsylvania do not like Dr. Oz.
No. And the lead went from 6 to 3 to maybe 2.5. If he has a good debate, I feel fairly confident about this. But, if this thing breaks against us, we're going to lose a lot. We've got to be prepared for that. We've got to do everything we can to stop it from breaking against us. That's why we've got to got to take some of these issues head on here and be kind of single in our focus this last few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate in Seattle, Washington, across the country, says, I love listening to the podcast while enjoying Magic Spoon and really looking at Blinkist for Christmas presents for my family. Boy, our sponsors are really scoring big with our listeners, James.
Go ahead, Kate. Go, girl.
Right.
You go, girl.
Kate says on the question, my Republican retiree dad from Pennsylvania is always on me about how political the January 6 hearings are. I say, sure, they're political, but they are bipartisan. How fantastic are these hearings? Have you ever seen Congress produce anything as compelling?
Well, first of all, the reason that they're this way is that the Democrats gave them everything. They had subpoena power. They could have done anything they wanted. The one thing they said they probably point Jim Jordan and...
No, James. That was before. Earlier, they gave him the 9/11 Commission.
They gave him everything.
Which was everything. And then they said, the Republicans voted that down. And then Pelosi says, all right, we'll have our own. And that's when they try to appoint Jim Jordan, which would have been insane.
Well, it's just the argument that your friends are making is just, frankly... There's just no truth to it. They tried to do everything they could, and it was their choice that they didn't do this. And they left it, and, they've put on a really compelling case, and I think they got more to come. But this is not the Democrats ramming something through. This is just real stupidity. It's like Trump and these legal issues. This guy can't stop confessing. He can't stop confessing. In this E. Jean Carroll case, his defense was he couldn't slander because he was president, and the president can't do that. I don't know. Some people say the legal argument, they had some chance that could have worked. Well, he just said the same thing again, that he's not president. This guy cannot stop confessing. He is a lawyer's nightmare. And that's what happened with the the January 6th commission. They gave him everything, and they said no.
Even his second-rate lawyers don't want him to be within a continent of the January 6th committee. There ain't no way he's going to testify.
No way.
Mike,
all right, Albert, can you do one more?
Wait, one more. Mike in Austin, Texas says, can you explain to me the connection that I just can't see, nobody's laid out? How would a Republican majority in the House affect inflation, gas prices, or that silly old kitchen table everyone likes to bring up? If Craven McCarthy becomes Speaker, will I suddenly be paying $2 a gallon? Boy, Mike, you nailed it. The only Republican answer to inflation, which they say is terrible, and it is it's all due to Democratic spending. Why then are the Democrats responsible for the 10% inflation rate in Germany? They have no solutions, and if anything, I think your friend Craven might make it worse.
Yeah, I think so too. And I go back to the ad I want to run. Yes, everybody. Actually, inflation is where Britain is over 10% now. I know that's an argument you can't make, but you just make the general argument. We, like everybody's doing this. Who has the best plan to deal with it?
Hey, now for the outrage of the week. Donald Trump wanted to be president because he loves attention, but maybe even more, it afforded him new opportunities for scams. This week, the House Oversight Committee revealed that he overcharged Secret Service agents staying at his hotel. In one case, $1,185 a night for staying at the Trump D.C. hotel. The president's son, Eric, said, I'm sorry, agents were staying at discounted rates at the Trump hotel. Yeah, sure, Eric. Just as Trump University offered a real education, or how about the Trump charity that the New York Attorney General shut down and made you take a mandatory training on how to operate a real charity? The Trump scams are family affairs.
Well, my outrage is this. I walked in a room, somebody, there were 100 people in there. And John Durham, the Bill Barr appointed special counsel, was one of them, and you said, there's a massive asshole in this room. Point to that person. You would point right to John Durham. This guy looks like what he is. And just pull his picture up and look at it. Now, of course, he was humped and promoted by Trump and by Sean Hannity and all of Fox, and he's been handed one devastating loss after another. And it's just another one of these things where I can't remember when there's been a Democratic special counsel. And my favorite headline about John Durham, he's the worst independent counsel since Ken Starr. If you get your name in the same headline as Ken Starr, you're not doing very well. And the John Durham thing was a massive failure, and a massive failure to do anything. Of course, Merrick Garland, probably smartly, gave him all the rope he could and let him hang himself. And that's exactly what John Durham did. And I have to tell you, it's rather gleeful watching him dangle at the end of a rope. I mean.
And I saw Sean Hannity last night. He said it really doesn't matter whether he won or lost. No. All kinds of information. Yeah, sure. No. Anyway, well, you're right.
The criminal justice system for a political end, ruin people's lives, let them run up $1 gazillion in legal fees when they had no case at all. Great.
Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. Don't forget to send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show at Politicon. Following this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you check out the links to our sponsors, Lomi, Blinkist, and Raycon in the show notes. We deeply thank you for supporting them. When you do, it helps make this podcast happen. To keep up with us, subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. Please rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show as we continue our War Room planning.